The Visit is a horror film that tells the story of a brother and a sister who go visit their grandparents whom they've never met, but it turns out that the weekend doesn't go the way they'd expect it to. However, this is also the return of M. Night Shyamalan, and by that I mean that this isn't his masterpiece that he's coming back triumphantly with, and this isn't another Sixth Sense. What this is him actually making a good movie, which he hasn't done in a while. And it's really cool to see him after, being shoved into the blockbusters with Avatar: The Last Airbender and even After Earth, him finally saying, you know what? I've made this garbage. I've decided I'm not going to work for the studio. I'm going to take all that money I made and actually make this on my own. And he independently produced this film. So while I don't want to hype it up and be like, this is the greatest thing in the world, it's just really good to see him come back. It's sort of like if you had Little Johnny and Little Johnny kept getting Fs and you're like, you know what? I'm done with you, Little Johnny. And then all of a sudden, Little Johnny starts getting better grades. You know he's not going to go from F to A's, but you're really proud that Little Johnny got a C. This is M. Night's C. Of course, as always, I want to break down the film, talking about the good, the bad, and then towards the end, everything in between with the spoilers section. So let's get into the good. What I loved most about the film is how he was able to mix genres and play around with them, because this movie right down the middle is half horror, half comedy. Not the greatest horror, the greatest comedy, but he's able to mesh them well, and it's not like a parody sort of like Shaun of the Dead or even Cabin in the Woods. This is like a real life scenario, but it's, again, those moments of comedy and those moments of horror that are mixed in perfectly. It is interesting to note that supposedly M. Night had filmed a whole version that was just a comedy, a whole version that was just a horror, and then he mixed them together, and that is probably why you get this perfect mesh. On top of it, the film is also a found footage type movie, and by that I mean that it is found footage, but you actually have a reason for why some of the shots look a bit better, and that's that the girl character in this movie actually wants to make a documentary. So you have establishing shots and a lot of things that look a bit better. It still has those found footage elements where, if you don't like shaky cam, there's a scene where they're playing hide and seek. It's very shaky cam-ish, but I love the way that they were able to film the movie, have an actual reason for why some of the shots looked really good, but they were always consistent as to only having footage from those two cameras. And also with her actually being a film nerd, why she was always filming. M. Night also sprinkles a little bit of drama in the movie, which I know a lot of people may say, oh, it's a little too over the top or too sappy or cheesy. I will 100% defend it because I thought it worked perfectly and was one of my favorite parts of the movie. When you have these kids and they have a backstory to them, and I thought that it was reflected very well in the movie, and it definitely comes into play in the third act. And that is also the best part of the movie. You want to go into this thing not knowing anything about it. Going in and knowing that the first two halves are fun, to some people it may drag a little bit, but that third act, that's where it's worth the money. Getting into the negatives of the film, like I said, the first 2/3 of the film may be a bit too slow and some people may not like it. They may not like the comedy because a lot of it relies on the kid from the Alexander Horrible No Good. He continues to have horrible days in this movie as well, but one of his big comedic moments is that he raps. It's cringeworthy rapping. To me, I got chuckles from it. I can see other people just sitting there going, this is not funny. As I also said, it's half comedy, half horror, so if you go in there expecting like a majestic horror movie and to be just frightened, you won't unless you're really scared of senior citizens. But overall, I still thought it was worth it at the end with that third act. But what I want to get into is everything else in between, and obviously the spoilers. So if you did not care to go watch the movie, but you're curious to see what the big plot twist was at the end, or if you want to get more stuff clarified and just really get into the spoilers, stay here. If not, I would say go watch the movie and then come back. But let's get into the spoilers in 3, 2, 1. Now, the breakdown of the movie is that you have the mother, who was played by Catherine Hahn, and she was living with her parents, and she found this boyfriend. She wanted to run away. The big thing that happens is that when she wants to leave, they sort of slap each other, and that makes things awkward. So when she leaves, has her kids, and then her husband leaves her, she never gets back with her parents because of that awkward altercation that they had. The parents, however, are always contacting her, and they're like, hey, I want to see you, until they finally say, you know what, if you don't want to see us, can we at least see our grandkids? That is the reason why the mom goes, well, I don't want to see them, but I guess they can definitely see their grandkids, plus I got a boyfriend, I want to go hang out with him, and that is the reason why they go. Going to the grandparents' perspective, supposedly they were volunteers at what you first think is a rehab center, like people who are addicted to drugs and stuff like that. No, it turns out it's a rehab center, but it's also a mental facility. And that's where I question, why would you have volunteers working at a mental facility where you have really insane people? However, they thought that was okay, and it turns out that they didn't have enough volunteers because two of the people who were there break out. They then murder the real grandparents. They knew that these grandparents' kids were going to come over, and since they murdered their own kids, they're like, well, we want to have new grandkids. So they take their spots. They go and they pick up the new grandchildren, and that's where things go. Some things to note, however, is again, if they broke out, wouldn't there be like a whole search warrant for these people who, as they said, killed their own kids, and that's why they were in a clinical ward? On top of it, not only do they go out to obviously pick up the kids, but there are moments where they go into town you're not dumb because you obviously were able to run away, so why would you risk going back into town? And there was even a shot that I thought was really cool. It's the grandparents and then the fake grandparents, and they show you like, oh snap, it was never these two, it was these two. Unless it was photoshopped, that picture makes no sense, because if I were volunteering at a mental hospital, they wouldn't let me take little Johnny out to take a picture of him in the park. Regardless, the crazy grandparents are now taking care of the grandkids, and when the grandkids finally realize, the script does this thing in where they try too hard to let the audience know, hey, remember these kids have baggage, and she never wanted to look in the mirror, and he always froze like he did in his football game. So they're big triumphant moments, which I really liked, which was her finally looking in the mirror, breaking into it so she can, RIP the lady, even though there was other stuff she could have used. That was her triumphant moment of saying, I can finally look myself in the mirror. For the kid, it was, you know what, I'm frozen, but you know what, I'm finally going to make that tackle. But of course, both situations, they let you know like, oh, I tackle number 33, and they're like, hey, audience, in case you forgot, this was that moment where what we were talking about earlier finally came back. Either way, I found it to be a very entertaining movie. I thought that the comedic pieces worked at points, and I really liked the thriller sort of horror aspect that happened with that third act, which I felt is worth the price of admission. But of course, with the spoiler section and anything else that you thought about the movie, we can definitely discuss it down below. Let me know some things that you picked up if you saw it for the first time or saw it again. If you think this is M. Night's triumphant return and you think that he'll finally be able to do better movies, because as we know, as a filmmaker, if you're doing it on your own, you have more leeway and more creativity. But as always, we can discuss the movie down below, whether you liked it or not, in the comments section. Until next time, I'll be seeing you guys later.